we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
Has he been impeached yet? I'm Ann Northrup.
Can't we wish them a happy LGBT History Month?
Please, go right ahead.
We're here to teach you some lessons.
I'm looking forward to something happening, but...
Nancy Pelosi did get the ball rolling on impeachment. We'll have some things to say about that.
Yeah, it's like the Buster Keaton movie with all the rocks rolling down the hill, and he's dodging them, and Trump is dodging them, too. Not that I would ever besmirch Buster Keaton's name by comparing him to Trump. Meanwhile, the first National Trans Visibility March was held in Washington.
Trump has pitted the United States of America, that's us, against a gay teacher's lawsuit over his firing by a Catholic school.
Couldn't they just leave well enough alone? We'll hear from Aimee Stephens on videotape, the trans plaintiff in one of the 3 LGBT cases coming before the U.S. Supreme Court on October 8th.
This coming week, a bisexual student in Tennessee took his own life after being cyberbullied. Very sad.
Very, very sad. Teenager, you know. A Canadian student has found that high school...
study, actually. It's a misprint.
Andy, you have led me into
I'm sorry.
I'm
just noticing it now. It was a study.
Okay. A Canadian study finds that high school GSAs benefit all students. Well, that makes sense.
Damn that autocorrect. Yeah. Dr. Sunshine Wang, that was her name, who exposed the spread of HIV in China through infected blood, has died.
It's quite a story, and she was quite a hero. And Andy will review The Politician, which is full of LGBT themes. Why not? It's from Ryan Murphy, now playing on Netflix.
And if you sign up for our email blast each week, we got a lot of web extras for you this week.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we have to start with the Trump administration in Washington, sad as it is.
Well, Nancy Pelosi took a lovely picture from the balcony of her office at the Capitol this week. There she is with Jonathan Van Ness, whose book is just out. He's from Queer Eye. He came out about having HIV, wrote a book about his history, and there they are. She took time out in this busy week to be with him, and she really did pull the trigger on impeachment this week.
And has been quite eloquent, and I've appreciated that. I've appreciated everything they're doing. I worry, of course, that the Trump administration is pulling out all its cannons and guns.
Well, you better be careful about what you say. You'll be accused of treason and executed.
Please. But I will say this. Last week, I was quite, dismissive.
You thought nobody cared.
I was dismissive of the idea that we could get rid of him this way. I figured, yes, the House being led by the Democrats could impeach him, but I thought the idea of the Senate going along and convicting him and getting rid of him was impossible. I still think it's highly unlikely, but
I think it's likely.
I've gotten a little carried away with the details of this and the fact that people are so outraged.
It's all dependent on the rats leaving a sinking ship and turning state's evidence. There are things happening as we sit here on Wednesday where people are testifying in Congress behind closed doors, which could have a big impact on this.
Well, I still think the thing that would have the biggest impact, just to theorize, is if we saw some transcripts of phone calls between Trump and Putin.
Oh, yes.
Where they plot the end of the United States.
They've probably already been destroyed.
Yes, because he's not like Nixon. He would not preserve the tapes.
Do you think his call for shooting immigrants in the legs and feeding them to alligators is going to raise his poll numbers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually his administration has preserved the Ukraine call because everything is digitized now, and they can't get rid of things the way they might have in the past. So they put it in this sort of secret stash place.
Secret server.
But they could not get rid of it completely. So there's more there, and the question is how much more will come out, I guess.
Right. Well, and why do we want this man?
Oh, wait. The height of irony. What was the most ironic moment this week in this context? When the NRA,
irony is dead.
The NRA says to Trump, we'll help finance your defense if
you stop playing games.
You stop playing games on gun control. It's like they're talking to the president of Ukraine.
Well, with all this stuff with Trump, this is all in the face of, his exposure for, he just got over what he thinks he got free of the Mueller thing, and then he just goes ahead and does it again and starts it all over again.
Well, he may think he got free, but I don't quite buy that because, in fact, he's still sending Barr around the world to investigate parts of that. So I don't think he feels free of that. I think he just keeps doing this stuff because I don't think he has a rational thought that, I'm free, now I can go do this. I think this is just what he does all the way along. When he says he had a perfect phone call with Ukraine and the president, I think he believes that. And I think he is...
Well, I'll tell you, I watched Hannity for an hour just to get a sense of how they talk about these things, and they are being fed a very different line. All right, but we're furious because to go over the Trump crimes for the week, the so-called Justice Department, besides being implicated in the Ukraine scandal, as Ann just said, they have injected themselves into a lawsuit. Now, we've been telling you about these Catholic high school teachers in Indianapolis. One of whom got fired, one of whom was retained by his Jesuit-run school, Catholic schools, and all right, we've been following this story.
Well, the Catholic Archdiocese in Indianapolis wanted to excommunicate the school that refused to fire the married gay teacher. And the Vatican is against that.
Well, no, the Vatican said they suspended that sanction, and that we talked about that last week. But now, so the teacher who got fired, I mean, human rights laws give what's called a ministerial exception. If you teach religion, essentially, then you have to line up with the religion. But this guy is not a religion teacher. I don't know what subject he taught, and he was fired. So he's going to the Human Rights Commission and saying, "Hey, we're protected here under sexual orientation." So the Trump Justice Department is injecting itself into the case. They are not a party to this case, but I don't think anything escapes Mike and Karen Pence, when it comes to Indiana and it comes to religious freedom. And they are arguing.
They filed a statement of interest because they're interested in things like this.
They said the First Amendment bars the courts from interfering with how a religious group applies its teachings. Well, wait a minute. I mean, a lot of the holy books call for our death penalty for us. I know that Trump calls for the death penalty for a lot of things, but these religions do. And it's a very alarming position. Now, we had a picture of them there. It's Joshua Payne Elliott, who was fired from Cathedral High School. His husband, Leighton, still teaches at the Jesuit-run high school.
There they are.
And so this is but the DOJ getting involved in local lawsuits is a chilling precedent.
Especially supporting the right of the Catholic Archdiocese to fire married gay teachers.
Right.
Really ugly. Well, Pompeo, the Secretary of State, as a sideline from his nefarious activities within this whole Ukraine scandal, and he's quite a piece of work.
He thinks he can be the next senator from Kansas.
Well, they ask him about what he knows about these calls, and then they accuse him of lying. He didn't lie. He said, "I haven't seen the whistleblower's report."
Well, he said he'd only read the first two paragraphs, but he didn't talk about that he was in on the call.
Yeah,
he knows
but
what
he
was
wasn't.
said.
He didn't say I don't know about it. He said I haven't seen the whistleblowers report, which was literally true.
Is Trump getting upset with him for not saying it's a perfect call?
What I want to know is this Christian behavior? He's a big right-wing Christian.
Lying, you mean?
Dissembling.
You want me a drink?
I do not.
All right.
But here's what he's doing on the side. He has barred Mariela Castro and her family from visiting the U.S. On the grounds that Cuba is a human rights abuser and is directing human rights abuses in Venezuela. Now, this is a pot calling the kettle black situation. I am not a fan of Mariela Castro.
She has her detractors within the movement.
I am a detractor, but I really don't like any of this barring people from the country. I don't care which administration does it or on which grounds.
They stopped. We'll get to it. We'll get to it when we talk about internationalism barring people. And Pompeo, I guess it's Trump's nominee, or Pence. For the top human rights job at the State Department is a guy named Marshall Billingsley, torture advocate under the Bush administration, the second Bush administration.
Any relation to Barbara Billingsley? Beaver Cleaver's mother?
It's spelled differently.
Oh, good.
But you never know. There's variations in spelling. The human rights groups are very much opposed to this, but the GOP is absolutely shameless. Here's what's going to happen when impeachment reaches the Senate. There need to be, how many senators? 3? We're not going to just dismiss the thing immediately?
20 Republicans.
No, for conviction.
Yeah.
But when it comes in there, they can be a motion to essentially to dismiss it before Chief Justice Roberts even gets started with the trial, and say a motion to dismiss is granted because this and that could be done on a simple majority under the rules.
It certainly could be, and could disappear very fast. And as long as we're in the shameless category, which actually could consume the show and beyond. The Trump administration, Federal Highway Administration, has told little Ames, Iowa, not so little, it's a nice university town, that it must change its crossing, street crosswalks, thank you. This is one crosswalk that they made into a rainbow-colored crosswalk, including the black and brown stripes. Very nice.
And the federal government, the U.S. Department of Transportation, says these are non-compliant and a danger to pedestrians there at Douglas Avenue, which is not a federal road. And the city has decided to keep its rainbows.
Yes, they're thumbing their nose at the Trump administration over their rainbow crosswalks. Thank you, Ames,
So there's
Iowa.
one less Republican in the House this week, Chris Collins of upstate New York. He's the first House member who endorsed Trump. He's been indicted for insider trading, but he was reelected upstate New York anyway, where it's very conservative.
Most of these people get reelected.
He took a plea deal. Of course, his leaving improves the chances of the Republicans holding on to that seat upstate.
All right. We were happy to see that the first National Trans Visibility March in Washington, D.C. this weekend was a big hit. Estimates of attendance range from 1,000 to 3,000 people.
And, only a few years ago, there were very few visible transgender people in this country.
Yeah. That was a terrific thing, and congratulations to everybody there. It came off without a hitch and was a big success. Now, looking ahead in Washington to next week, on Tuesday, October 8th, we have a big day.
Yes.
Because the Supreme Court is going to hear arguments on 3 cases related to LGBTQ rights, specifically employment rights, I think.
Yes, they're all employment cases.
Yeah.
2 gay cases and 1 transgender case, and we're going to hear from Aimee Stephens, who worked for a funeral home in Michigan. I think was fired 7 years ago for transitioning.
That's how long these cases take to get going. But the basic question is, there are non-discrimination laws that cover sexual orientation and gender identity in less than half the states in this country. In more than half the states, you can be fired from your job for for just being LGBTQ. Your employer can just say, I don't like you, you're out of here, and you have no protections.
Except that more and more lawyers, advocates, and more courts are saying, well, you know, you're really, when you're discriminated against on that basis, especially in transgender cases, by the way, earlier, that's sex discrimination.
Yes, because you're being fired because of your gender. And so this has been argued in the courts, and it's gone back and forth. We've had decisions both ways.
More positive than negative lately.
Yes. So 3 cases with these issues have now worked their way up to the Supreme Court. We're a little worried because we now have the very conservative court led by Chief Justice Roberts, who is our great hope.
Yes, even though, and all these people say all these 5 say they're originalists, which is a lot of nonsense. But as we keep pointing out, even Justice Scalia, back in the day, said it's not just about, you know, what you have between your legs in terms of your sex. It's how you express yourself. It's you know, sex stereotyping, and he upheld that.
Yes,
so,
in a previous case.
So
that's believe me. Do you think Neil Gorsuch or Brett Kavanaugh are going to go back to that? They're going to.
Well, they could just say, "Hey, you've got a bill in Congress to cover sexual orientation and gender identity.
Right.
I might even vote for it." As Clarence Thomas once said about sodomy, I would vote against sodomy laws. But there they are. It's
not our job. Let the politicians take care of this. Go past the Equality Act.
As many judges said on marriage, it's up to the legislature.
Including in New York State.
Right.
Anyway, the arguments are going to take place on Tuesday in these cases, and there's going to be a big demonstration with civil disobedience outside the Supreme Court. If you're interested in going to Washington and taking part in that, go to the housingworks.org website and sign up for their buses, or get yourself there however.
So we're going to show you Aimee Stephens now, her interview with someone from a guy named Jay Kaplan of the ACLU of Michigan, which took up her case in the beginning. And we're going.
The interview goes on at some length. We'll put the whole thing in our link to the whole thing in our show note. But we're going to show you just 3 minutes of Aimee talking about her situation as a trans woman being fired.
How did you come to the point where you decided to come out at work as a transgender woman?
Up until that point, I'd been living basically 2 lives. One at home and in public, and one at work. And in the beginning, that wasn't so bad. But as time goes on and as time progressed, I got to the point that living 2 lives, being 2 people, was becoming downright impossible. And I knew that I couldn't keep going that way. And things came to a head in November of 2012 when I stood in the backyard with a gun to my chest, pondering the question, if I can't go forward and I can't go backwards, where does that leave me? And if this is all I have to look forward to, then what's the point of continuing? And in that hour, going over that and over that in my mind, I chose life. And I realized that I liked me too much to just disappear and go away. So that's when I started writing the letter to my bosses. It took a good while to get that letter right, to where I was happy with it, that it expressed my feelings and the way I was feeling and what I needed to do. And when I presented the letter to the powers that be, they weren't happy with it. They kind of read it, tucked it away, and then 2 weeks later they came back and fired me. and said that was not going to work for them, and that my services were no longer needed. It hurt. And I went home and I talked to my wife, and she agreed that it wasn't right and that we needed to do something about it. So we contacted the ACLU. In fact, we actually talked to Jay on that first call in and visit. And 5 years and something later, here we are.
Here we are. It's such a great example of an individual deciding to stand up and do something, and not, necessarily knowing where to go and how to handle it, and got some help, and now the whole country is going to decide this.
Well, clearly she's been through hell from, all the pain of her own situation and the suicide ideation to now a point where she could take the chance of coming out to her employer with no support from anyone, and now be at the Supreme Court. It's amazing. It's an amazing journey.
And we will put that whole interview, which is about 17 or 18 minutes, in our email if you'd like to listen to it and hear her whole story. Thank you, Aimee.
Yes, and to all the plaintiffs.
Yes.
And all the lawyers who are working on this. So we will keep you up to date on what's going on. In fact, we will have guests next week after the arguments have been made at the Supreme Court, analyzing what happened and bringing you the latest.
Well, we're bringing in Arthur Leonard, who has been working on these cases and writing about them for decades. This is not a new thing, what's before the Supreme Court now. But back in Michigan, a federal judge there in Grand Rapids blocked the Attorney General, Dana Nessel, out lesbian, from barring faith-based agencies that exclude LGBT couples from adoption, issued a preliminary injunction. The judge said the state was trying to stamp out the Catholic agency's religious belief and replace it with the state's own. Whoa.
There is this little thing called the separation of church and state.
Please.
But the judge said, accused Nessel of being hostile to religion. And I thought, aha, this is the implication of the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, because even though we didn't lose that on the grounds that the cake shop had a right to discriminate, what we lost it on was the idea that the state had been, the Civil Rights Commission had been nasty to religion. And this Michigan judge is saying the Attorney General is being nasty to religion. All she did was broker a settlement that said, if you're going to take state money, you can't.
She was being sued.
And she settled the case by saying you can, if you're going to have state money, you cannot discriminate against anybody on the basis of religion.
And in Philadelphia and Massachusetts places, look, you agencies, nobody's stopping you from making adoption referrals and doing that. But you can't get state money to do it.
And the judge said, we have a system here where this agency does not handle same-sex couples or LGBT
And it's been that way forever. What's your problem?
The agency refers you to other agencies that are more friendly, and that system has been working. So let's not rock the boat here. Let's not upset our religious friends.
And I don't want my tax money going to a bigoted organization.
I agree.
Bad enough that
Not that it doesn't all day long.
It's bad enough that they have a tax exemption to practice their bigotry. More about which later. By the way, we gave Chuck Schumer a hard time and went over his record, and he was the keynote speaker at the Human Rights Campaign dinner this week.
Well, that's why we went after him.
But we didn't. I didn't have the quote from Alfonso David is somebody who's the new executive president there, and we wish him well, and he's been raising a lot of good issues. But he did say in a press release that Chuck was an unwavering ally from the earliest days of his political career.
Wrong.
Not so. Not only that, the Human Rights Campaign didn't even endorse him in 1998. They went with Al D'Amato, and we were upset about that because we wanted a Democrat in the seat. Oh, my God. And it took, believe me, it took Chuck Schumer until 2007 to come out for same-sex marriage. And Paul Schindler, who writes for the Gay City News, said he approached Schumer in the mid-'90s, and he was terrible. He was just dismissive of our issues.
Yes. Well, we did demonstrations against him, and he
Twice.
was nasty to us. More than that. All right, well, speaking of politicians, we have also next week coming up the CNN forum with the Democratic presidential candidates, 10 of them. It's going to go on for 5
on
hours.
LGBT issues.
5 hours. They're each going to get half an hour. And Bernie Sanders, who did not show up at the one in Iowa because he had a conflict, has now decided he's showing up if he gets out of his hospital bed, where he's had a couple of stents.
Tulsi Gabbard and
in.
Andrew Yang have declined, and there's also an October 15th regular debate where I don't know where that is, but
Well, this LGBT forum
Los Angeles
starts at 7 p.m. Eastern, and in order for half an hour each.
Okay.
Booker, Sanders, then at 8 o'clock Biden and Buttigieg, 9 o'clock Warren, Kamala Harris, 10 o'clock Beto and Amy Klobuchar, 11 o'clock Julian Castro and Tom Steyer.
So is it going to be like the environment debate where one correspondent's going to be with each person in different cities? No, this is all in L.A., though.
Yeah, but they have...
Not a panel.
They have 5 different correspondents who are each going to take an hour.
Some of whom are homosexual themselves.
Don Lemon, Anderson Cooper.
Right,
yeah.
and God knows who else by then.
Dana Bash and a couple of others.
Okay.
Who else will come out by then?
Okay. By the way, we talked about the brush and nib Arizona decision last week, and we said that it wasn't sweeping and everything, but maybe I didn't focus completely on it, but it really was very limited.
Yes.
It's like you don't. Well, let me just go over it because
but before you do, the Hobby Lobby decision was described as very narrow. The Masterpiece Cake Shop decision was regarded as very narrow.
Give them an inch, they'll take a mile.
Exactly. My point exactly.
So what the judges in the Arizona case said, and these are people who design wedding invitations, things, you don't have to make invitations that include the name of the couple or maybe a rainbow flag on the side, but there's no exemption from selling gay couples custom designed save the date notices, menus, table numbers, and welcome signs. So photographers, florists, and photographers can be compelled to do custom work for same-sex weddings under this decision.
I think all those could have the couple's name on them, particularly the save the date notice. It's a little murky, and I think it opens the door a crack in ways that are inappropriate.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's...
In Maryland, a federal judge dismissed a challenge to the ban on conversion therapy for minors. This was a Liberty Counsel case appealing the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. No, they're going to appeal it to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. But the judge in this case, Chazanow, said that these quacks, they can discuss, endorse, criticize, or recommend conversion therapy, but they can't do it.
Let's give a little credit to the Human Rights Campaign, having blasted them. They are supporting Stacey Abrams' Fair Fight operation, the attempt to stop suppression of the vote around the country. They are making a 6-figure donation to that operation.
And Alfonso David gave a very good speech at the dinner, and thank you, HRC, for feeding us a lot of the news that we use on this program.
Through your AM Equality Daily newsletter, which those of you who are tired of listening to us can sign up for online.
We're not going to be around forever.
Well, it doesn't have everything, but it has a lot of good stuff every day. All right. I think we should hit some. We want to do the homecoming royalty. Let's do them.
Okay.
So we have a couple of guys. I'm looking for the one I have a picture of first. I have Illinois and I have Tennessee. In Memphis, Tennessee, Brandon Allen was crowned homecoming royalty. They're no longer saying king or queen. There's Brandon with a sash.
Oh, that's the new thing. This was White Station High School.
Yes.
Wore a gold sequin.
Yes, in rural Tennessee.
Principal said that the school loves and supports everyone regardless of who they are or what they believe.
And at East Leyden High School in Franklin Park, Illinois, next to O'Hare Airport, a hockey player came out and was crowned homecoming king. There he is.
He was crowned within a matter of months after coming out. He said he was inspired by the YouTube video of out gay wrestler Dylan Geik, G-E-I-C-K. He came out and he found that all of his friends stood by him, and he hopes to study neuroscience at UCLA.
And what the video showed him was that he was not alone.
Yeah.
And that's a very important point, because I think most people struggling with their sexual orientation or their gender identity do still feel they're alone.
Yes.
So the fact that he was able to take strength from watching a YouTube video was pretty impressive.
In New York State, we're going to be the first in the nation to mandate that all veteran services certify all staff in LGBTQ cultural competence.
In Florida and Texas, there have been arrests in the murders of some black trans women in Belglade, Florida, Jacksonville, Dallas. Actually, in Belglade, they've named a person of interest, but arrests in Jacksonville and Dallas. And there was arrest in Washington, D.C. of a guy who'd been making attacks on and robbing trans women. The American Medical Association has now declared murders of black trans women to be an epidemic.
Absolutely.
Some contempt was heaped on them for doing that, but in fact, given the numbers, I think they were right to do so.
In Jackson Heights, Queens, the most diverse neighborhood in New York, a gay couple was having a late night dinner there. Alberto Cruz and his friend Miguel were attacked by homophobes inside the restaurant. Now, this was back on 9/13, but the community rallied on the 24th, and the employees at the restaurant were no help, and they're investigating it as a hate crime.
And a terrible story, another attack in Jacksonville, Florida. A man beat up a trans woman.
Well, actually, they've learned that this is a gay man, not a trans person.
Right.
A gender nonconforming, but a gay man.
Okay. Tied him to the bumper of the pickup truck, I think?
Well, savagely beat the guy first, and then tied him to the bumper of a minivan, dragged 2 blocks, taken to the hospital with life-threatening injuries. The police surveillance video is too graphic to release to the public. But a guy named Eric Sean Bridges was arrested for attempted murder in this case.
And we were very sorry to hear about the death of Channing Smith in Tennessee.
Oh, God, 16 years old.
He was 16 years old. He came out to his classmates as bisexual. Kids shared this news online.
Well, he had sent a sexually explicit text to a guy.
And that
guy let it out, and it got out into the whole school. He said, "I really hate how I can't trust anyone." That was his last message on Instagram, because those I did trust were so fake. At a memorial service, Billy Ray Cyrus was there and sang Amazing Grace. Students have formed a Justice for Channing group. The DA has denied that he failed to investigate this, but this is a notoriously anti-LGBT DA. And this is a guy who refused to prosecute domestic violence when it came to same-sex couples.
Yes.
So anyway, Channing's brother Joshua said his brother was the sweetest kid on earth. He was a band kid, 6'3", just gone.
And a couple of sweet guys that we lost in the last few weeks here in New York there are going to be memorial services for them coming up that we want to let you know about. Andy Velez, longtime ACT UP member and member of every other activist group in between, died, I guess, a couple of months ago. This Saturday at 7 o'clock, Saturday the 5th, at the LGBT Center on West 13th Street, there's going to be a memorial service for him.
We will be there.
We will. It should be huge.
And then Alan Fleischman, who was a big gay political activist, one of the fathers of the gay political movement in Brooklyn. They're going to have his service on November the 10th at 2 o'clock at the LGBT Community Center,
That's a
208
Sunday,
West 13th Street.
Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
In Southeast LA, in the Latinx community there, they're going to have their first Pride Parade next April. Latinx officials and LGBT activists there are planning the first parade. We'll keep an eye on that.
In Georgia, TILDEF, the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund, is suing Houston County for excluding medically necessary trans health care in employee health plans. They're suing on behalf of the deputy sheriff, Anna Lang, who was denied coverage.
And now, how do we feel about the New York Archdiocese and Cardinal Timothy Dolan reporting that all abusive priests have been removed from ministry? Very few recent reports of any abuse, and they are putting in place an annual training protocol, and they have paid $67 million to 338 victims, and they have an ex-judge, Barbara Jones, overseeing the whole thing.
Why don't you let priests have normal sex lives and get married and be gay and whoever they are, and women be priests,
Yep.
and et cetera. That might solve a lot of these problems.
That would be interesting.
Because you breed them with your ridiculous celibacy requirement.
It's a pathological dynamic.
What do you think about the Bechtel test making it into the Merriam-Webster dictionary? Do you know about this?
Of course I do.
Okay. It's a new term. It's named for the
Well, it's not that new, but it's,
Well,
I
the
guess.
term isn't new, but it's in the dictionary. It's named for cartoonist and graphic novelist Alison Bechtel. It's a set of criteria as a test to evaluate a work of fiction, such as a film, on the basis of inclusion and representation of female characters. Here's the test. It has to have at least 2 women in it who, 2, talk to each other about, 3, something besides a man. She credits her friend, Liz Wallace, with coming up with this, and she put it into her comic strip, Dykes to Watch Out For.
In Virginia, a report from the state says 4% of marriages in the last 5 years were same-sex spouses, more in cities than rurally, but
As to be expected.
over a period of time.
Although the
that's
Levins
good.
were a rural couple, but they had to get married in Washington, D.C. They were an interracial couple.
Congratulations to out gay poet Ocean Vuong,
Yes.
who's one of the recipients of the MacArthur Grant, sometimes called the Genius Grant, although the MacArthur Foundation doesn't like
And a
that,
nominee for the National Book Award.
for his very, very popular and well-reviewed book, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous.
On Earth, we're briefly gorgeous. That sounds...
So he went on, what was it, Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel?
No, he went on Seth Meyers' show
Meyers.
and gave an interview a bit ago, I guess I think it was in June. And it was one of the most moving interviews, and funny, because he
Yep.
talked about writing his novel
Yep.
in a closet, not the closet,
He
to get away from
literally-
his roommates.
He sat in a closet and wrote it.
But I mean, he talks about toxic masculinity. It's a very
Yep.
interesting interview, and we are going to link to it in our email. So you have to sign up for these emails, and I know more and more of you do. Every time we mention this, go to gayusatv.org and do that.
He also talks a lot about his Vietnamese mother and his relationship with her,
Yes.
and that was terrific.
Yes.
Very sweet.
Yes, he wrote. Congratulations to Versailles, Kentucky. 14th city there to pass a fairness ordinance. It passed 3-2. Local residents formed a group, and the ACLU of Kentucky got involved, and of course the statewide fairness campaign. The 14th city in Kentucky. We're making progress.
All
We're
right.
getting covered, but we still want the Supreme Court to protect us.
We do, but now we're going to move to international
Yes.
news.
Yes.
All right.
All right, in Canada, that study of gay-straight alliances
Yes.
showed that they benefit everyone at such schools. If you have a GSA at your school, heterosexual boys were half as likely to attempt suicide. And suicidal thoughts were also cut in half for lesbian, gay, bisexual students. And the longer the GSA has been around, the lower the rates.
Excellent. However, they evidently don't have enough of them in Toronto because hundreds of Christian evangelists attempted a march into a gay area, demanding civil rights for Christian evangelists.
Mayor John Tory joined the counter-protesters,
Yeah.
But it closed the downtown area for hours.
Well, they were fended off by cops who had to separate the gays and the evangelists. They've had previous incursions into the Village, which is the gay area, which provoked fights. So
no
I
one
guess
is stopping you from practicing your anti-LGBT religion.
Go
Can't
right
we
ahead.
all get along?
Yeah.
All right.
There was also some violence in Lublin, Poland, at the LGBTQ Pride Parade.
Yes.
Where, look at that, that is the cops protecting the marchers. There are, as often happens in these instances, probably more cops than marchers.
A big phalanx of police. There were no injuries, but the police detained at least 30 people. All this is in the run-up to the October 13th elections in Poland, where the right-wing party and the ruling party is pushing anti-LGBT sentiment, which is rife in Poland, and they're leading in the polls.
The right-wing attackers were throwing bottles and eggs, and the cops were using tear gas and water cannons on
the
them.
mayor of Lublin tried to ban the parade, but to its credit, the Polish Court of Appeal allowed it.
In Budapest, Hungary, they were screening a little LGBT anti-bullying film, and a far-right bunch of thugs called Our Nation burst into the theater and with signs saying "Stop LGBT propaganda, zero tolerance." This is all being promoted, of course, by the far-right president of Hungary, Viktor Orban.
Horrible guy.
Yeah.
Trump buddy.
Yep.
And in Brazil, the state-run theater dropped a trans-themed stage show. It's the Bolsonaro effect. And, back in August, the culture secretary there resigned after being ordered essentially to drop 4 LGBT-themed TV series from the public channel. Even corporations now are getting with the Bolsonaro program, and they are cutting funding to LGBT arts groups.
In Beirut, Lebanon, Islamic leaders forced the cancellation of Pride events, including a concert. Beirut, which is a very liberal city. A July concert had also been canceled by the band that has the gay leader. And that had been canceled as anti-Christian. So it's across the board.
But all the news isn't bad from the Middle East.
Wait a minute, I've got one more bad news story, and then we can do the good news stories.
Well, I got more bad news.
I think we should do all the bad news stories.
Well, all
so
right.
in Russia, activist Nikita Tomilov has fled the country under death threats from the group that killed Elena Grigorieva.
They dress in masks, these vigilantes, and terrorize LGBT people. You get a little picture in the mail of some mutilated bodies, and they say, "You're next."
And they call themselves Saw after the U.S. film Saw.
Oh my God! And the police would do nothing. These guys were hanging out outside his home, so he fled the country.
In Indonesia,
and his family members were threatened.
Yes, and the gay couple who had the kids who were attacked by the right wing.
These guys were attacked for having gay kids and being open to. For being gay and being open to their children.
Yes.
So they are now seeking asylum
here
in the United States.
Good luck with that. And in Indonesia, more protests, growing protests against the bad bills that are both anti-LGBT and a lot of other bad stuff. So we're trying to get some news on what the situation is with the bills.
Did you do Paraguay?
Nope.
The first Pride March in a place called Hernandarias was attacked by rocks and stun grenades. And in Asuncion, 1,000 marched for document changes for trans people there.
Right.
They're suing in Jamaica over the banning of the Montego Gay Pride. They are going to court about that.
In France, I'm moving to good news now, unless you have any more bad news. Think
well,
about that.
the other bad news is from the United Kingdom. That actress who was set to play the lead in The Color Purple, and she posted her homophobic tweets were found. So other actors said, "Are you still owning this? You're going to play a lesbian in The Color Purple in the lead?" And she said, "This is my religion. Gays are, wrong. I don't hate anybody, but I just quoted the Bible."
And I still want the money.
So now she is suing for religious discrimination.
Ay, ay, ay. Well, in France, the National Assembly has approved assisted reproduction for lesbians and unmarried women. The Senate still has to okay it. The right is freaking out about fatherless kids. There may be a big demonstration by the right on October 6th. This is routinely available elsewhere in Europe. This is unique to France.
Also in France, there's a pushback against the crackdown on football, what we call soccer, at games where there's homophobia being chanted, because they're starting to fine people and stop games, and people. So fans are now holding up banners with anti-gay slurs. Charming.
Because they're annoyed at having been told they're homophobic. But for the World Cup in Qatar, or however it's pronounced, in 2022, the country has said that LGBT people are welcome at the World Cup, but must respect Sharia law. No public displays of affection.
Please.
You can be gay, but don't tell anybody.
That's insane.
Yeah.
All right. Should we talk about the Pope?
Yes.
Yeah. So the Pope met privately with that Jesuit, James Martin, who was the author of Building a Bridge, a book about getting, the church to move a little bit along on the gay stuff. He's not an out gay himself. Instead of building a bridge, how about tear down that wall, Pope? Anyway,
exactly.
he said he shared the joys and hopes and griefs and anxieties of LGBT Catholics and LGBT people around the world, and he felt very encouraged by the meeting with the Pope, probably because you didn't try to pin him down on getting rid of that bigoted teaching.
True. Denmark this week celebrated the 30th anniversary of being the first country in the world to legalize civil unions or registered partnerships. Yeah. It's amazing how far we've come in 30 years.
Our friend Rex Wagner, who provides us with a lot of the news that we get, he feeds it to us. He went over there to photograph it and do stories about it at the time, because it was such a big deal that they finally did this. And look where we are now.
1989, and I remember that was in the middle of when you and I were working at Hedrick Martin and going out and talking in the schools.
Right.
And I remember being asked by a fourth grader about marriage rights for same-sex couples.
And you said, what?
Day. And I said, well, the only place in the world where it's legal is Denmark. And she got up and said, well, I think that's stupid. I think you should be able to marry anyone, even an elephant. So it must have been 89 or later.
And why not?
Yes. But in Ecuador, where they have legalized same-sex marriage, the lesbians who were the first married and had been together for 10 years, 2 months after their marriage, have filed for divorce.
Should we give them the nice story from Australia with the stamps? Speaking of marriage equality,
yes.
It's only 2 years after marriage equality there, but they're celebrating it with commemorative stamps. One says love is love with a rainbow, and the other says marriage equality, yes, with rainbow, and gay and lesbian couples actually at the scene of the announcement of the vote celebrating. Now, of course, in the United States, you have to be dead for 5 years to get a stamp, but we may get ours on same-sex marriage after the Supreme Court gets rid of that.
Yes, and it'll be dead for 5 years, and then we can have a stamp.
Yes, a stamp about it.
Okay.
All right. And
something to look forward to.
A couple of other stories. Well, they're very slow, by the way, on wiping out the convictions in the United Kingdom for sodomy and things like buggery over there. They're very, very slow about it.
That's
They're
too
just
bad.
not moving on it. All right. AIDS news.
I really was impressed by what I read about Dr. Shuping Sunshine Wang, who died at the age of 59 of a heart attack while on a hike in Utah.
Where she had moved, because she had been in central China.
Henan, China. She probably, 25, 30 years ago?
Yes.
1991.
Yes.
She blew the whistle, speaking of whistleblowers, on HIV-infected blood being passed around and infecting thousands and thousands of people in central China.
There was also a hepatitis epidemic there. I mean, 500,000 people were infected in these days.
When she tried to talk about it, because people would donate blood to make money, and then they would take some of the product out, and then they would return blood to people after putting it all together and sharing it, and
the government wasn't testing it for HIV or hepatitis.
Too expensive, and they rejected all her claims, and they fired her. She lost her job.
They vandalized her clinic.
They went in there with a baseball bat and broke all her beakers and everything. She lost her husband in the midst of this. She had to flee the country. There is a play that just opened in London called The King of Hell's Palace that is all about this and that describes her as a public health hero.
And it's going to be running until about, for a couple of weeks now at the Hampstead Theatre there in London.
She ended up finding a new husband and moving to the United States and going back to work here and evidently having a very happy life. And she had a very optimistic outlook, which is why she adopted the nickname of Sunshine. None of this destroyed her. She kept fighting, she kept moving on, and she's just an amazing hero, and it's really sad to lose her at 59, and what a wonderful story and wonderful person.
Okay.
Also in AIDS news, there's a new study from the Fenway Institute that studies trans men who have sex with men, and it studies their use of PrEP. And it finds that most know about it, but only a third are using it. And they have no health insurance, this is one of the reasons they're not using it, or some of the reasons. They have no available HIV testing, they are poor adherence to taking it, they have mental health issues because of their stigma, a lot of substance abuse, and they are ignored in the country, in the medical system. So trans men in particular are at risk for HIV infection because of their situation in society. It's a very sad study.
Oh. Also go to our website look up resources that are there for you around these things as well, because there are some resources out there.
All right. And a segue to entertainment news.
Let's start out with some good news. That children's show, Star Wars Resistance, it's a cartoon.
From Disney.
Yes, and the characters Flix and Orca, there they are a gay couple for sure. A lot of people picked up on some of their affect beforehand. Disney says, we're proud of that. And it was nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Children's Program.
The singer Sade has a trans male son, Isaac Theo Adu. We learned a couple of years ago about his existence and the fact that he's trans. Well, he is now announcing that he is recovering from bottom surgery, 6 months recovery from bottom surgery.
Wow.
He's writing online about how difficult it is. It's a lot, but he's home, and that's a lovely picture of him with his mother.
Okay, what do we have next? Well, we have Alexandra Billings, trans actor. I saw Alexandra in The Nap as a trans gangster, and she was hilarious.
She's done a lot of theater.
And she's also
Chicago, off-Broadway.
And you might know her from Transparent, where she's a star there.
Yeah.
She's going to join the Broadway cast of Wicked as Madame Morrible, like horrible,
yes.
In January. She's the first out trans actor to play the role, and so she's
a professor of
I'd love
theater.
to get her in here. I mean, I met her
please.
and talked to her, and I think she'd
Ask.
be a fan.
Alexandra,
we might
come here.
Might have to bleep a few words when she's here.
She's a singer. She's out about being HIV positive. She's an activist. Yeah, welcome to Broadway, and please come to Gay USA.
And speaking of Broadway, I saw two of my favorite actors, Eileen Atkins and Jonathan Pryce, in Height of the Storm. It's sadly a soporific vehicle. You can look that one up. It's by Florian Zellner. It's about an old couple, one or the other of whom may be dead, one of the other of whom may have Alzheimer's. I didn't care. I mean, but I love them. I still love them.
Well, I was very excited about going to see the spectacle of the Japanese version of Antigone at Park Avenue Armory. I like spectacles. I like things that are different and rich and
you want to be
moving.
Amazed.
I do. I want to be swept away by beauty and depth. And I have to say I found it tedious. And I recognize that I am a minority of one on that because it's gotten great reviews. A lot of people have enjoyed it. I don't want to, get people away from it. But honestly, I was going over my laundry list in my head.
All right, let's talk about
my grocery list.
Let's talk about Ryan Murphy. I now have Netflix, so I can talk about The Politician. It's about a high school election like none you've ever seen, mostly rich kids in Santa Barbara with some from the other side of the tracks. Ben Platt from Dear Evan Hansen openly wants to be president. That's him on the right. And there he is with David Corenswet, who is his opponent in the election. Well, what is his Mandarin tutor before that. So lots of gay, bi, trans content. Lots
it is Ryan Murphy.
Intrigue and violence, and an amazing supporting cast, including Jessica Lange, Gwyneth Paltrow, January Jones, and Bob Balaban as parents in this community. So it's crazy. They're like half-hour episodes. I'd recommend it. It's it's funny sometimes.
Wacky? Would you call it wacky?
It is wacky. It is wacky and somewhat unpredictable. But Ryan Murphy's next Netflix series is called Hollywood, coming in May. It's set in the 1940s, and Darren Criss is going to be one of the executive producers. And the kid who was in the other picture there, this guy Corenswet, is in it. Jeremy Pope from Choir Boy on Broadway, and what's the other one?
I'm so sorry I missed Choir Boy.
Anyway, it also stars...
I am still watching David Makes Man, which is the Terrell Alvin McCraney
But it also
series.
stars Jim Parsons, Joe Mantello, and Patti LuPone.
Whoa!
And this guy, Jim Picking, we got his picture? He's going to play a real-life person, Rock Hudson.
He doesn't look like Rock to me.
Well, you have to look at him.
Maybe in makeup. Holland Taylor's in it, too.
Yes, that's right. I had her down.
Yes.
That was my little arrow here. Holland Taylor. That's going to be fun.
It is. So set your DVRs for May for Hollywood.
All right.
Yeah. Well, all right. So it's Wednesday the 2nd.
Yes.
Let's see next week. First, what the Supreme Court does on our cases.
On Tuesday.
And whether the president remains the president or whether he's blown up the rest of the Congress and everything else.
Well, and if the Civil War hasn't started, they should not be talking about things like that. We've already had one. There are a lot of guns out there.
No, yeah, don't talk about that. All right, so we will see you next week with Art Leonard dissecting the arguments in the Supreme Court case and everything else that's happening in this wacky world.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.